Hey there, Rick. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. We spoke through email. You were out and about doing some traveling, living life to its fullest. But now we've managed to get you sitting in your office that I recognize from some of your virtual sessions that you've done in the past. And we're super eager to share your voice with the Math Moment Maker community. How are you doing today? And hey, where are you coming from? Tell us a little bit about yourself for those who don't know you.
Okay, we are going to be here for 3 or 4 hours, right?
Here we go. We're ready.
Now, I'm coming to you live from the Washington, D.C. area in Virginia, Maryland as well. We're all kind of gathered there geographically. So central, mid-Atlantic, I guess. And I'm feeling great today. Thank you for asking. I hope you guys are doing well. I'm excited about the new school year and the possibilities this year that the previous 3 or 4 years did not afford. As people are kind of sort of maybe looking at normalcy and getting excited about teaching again, and particularly math instruction. Background, this is my 43rd year in education, but I had only like 25 years in the classroom, and then partially in the classroom, and after that, and then the majority of my time now is working with teachers in their rooms or at conferences or with leadership on a variety of topics. One being instruction and very particular in math instruction, but looking at ethics and grading, use of metaphors and analogies in a math class or science class or coding or music class. They're used to strategically, not just left haphazardly. If I know you well enough, I can draw a connection between something you understand and what I'm teaching that's an abstraction in math, and suddenly you have a mini epiphany. You get it. And a lot of teachers leave that to chance. And we can talk more about that if you'd like. Also summarization, or how do you digest and process information, practical cognitive science, differentiation and equity quite a bit. And the last thing I do a lot of lately is how do you have conversations on very difficult topics and maintain civil discourse and offer a model to students, because certainly the United States Congress is not a good model for how you have civil discourse.
It's not that much better here, but maybe a little bit. I don't know.
I've been following it.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so it's a wide variety of topics, math being, one of the strength areas, but that's kind of where I'm coming from. I really did my student teaching in 1980 and did a whole year of that, and have just never left. They'll kick me out one day, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, we won't. No one's gonna kick you out, Rick. Yeah, that's quite the list. Like, I think you've got a lot of thinking going on right now, thinking about the different aspects that you just outlined. And I want to dig into, as a bunch of that stuff today, to get your thoughts on a few of those things and help our teachers, listeners right now too. But before we gotta get into the meat there, we've got to ask you the question that we ask every one of our guests.
Okay.
Being the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast, we always ask our guests to think back to a moment of their life, when we say math class, usually something from their history, something from childhood pops into their memory, and it stuck with you this whole time. And it could be like a great memory, it could be a memory that influenced you, it could be a memory that negative influenced you to some degree. But what would you say, Rick, is like when we say math class, like what memory has stuck with you all this time about math?
Well, portions of it, I assume, are still okay. Maybe portions may not have aged well, but Donald Duck and Math Magic Land. That is my go-to.
Okay, you got to fill me in here.
Yeah. How are we going to keep this episode to 30 minutes, guys? Like, come on. Like, I'm guessing that there's going to be a big story here, and I can't wait.
Oh, Donald Duck and Math Magic Land.
This
is the land at Disneyland.
This is a video that's available on YouTube today, but it's an ancient video. It was actually created in 1959. And when I was a kid in elementary school and middle school and elementary, and in the decade of the 60s and into early 70s, the recreation center at my school would show it on hot summer afternoons you could eat lemons or oranges, or they would serve, pop-up freezes of some sort. And you would sit there for half an hour and watch Donald Duck learn about mathematical principles in Donald Duck and Math Magic Land. the golden ratio, musical. There was a heck of a lot of jazz and the mathematics of jazz in there. There was a heck of a lot on the pool table and how you decide your shots with different angles. And you can literally make the ball go where you want if you understood the geometry of playing pool. And to this day, I cannot play pool without thinking of Donald Duck and Math Magic Land and what I learned as a 7-year-old in the 60s, or the 6-year-old. And so and then the rec department showed it, and then the schools got a hold of it and they started showing it. And to this day, when I have taught math instruction to elementary students, some middle school, I have used that. And then I've actually referenced it for some of the high school students with whom I work as well. And sometimes they go online and look at it. But I just, before the podcast, I knew that I was going to be asked this question. So I went and looked it up. And yes, it is widely known. It's available on YouTube for free. But it is one of those things that I realized, oh, math is so much more than the calculations and figures. And when I was in 5th and 6th grade, I had a lot of friends who were not getting the math of 5th and 6th grade math. And I started helping them out. And eventually they, the teachers at the time, for better or for worse, made me a lieutenant, an ambassador of mathematics. And I would take my little small study group into this side study room attached to our classroom, and I would proceed to reteach the lesson to them because they didn't get it in the main lesson. And that was probably planting the seeds of the future profession, right there, and doing that. And that was just so exciting. At the same time, I read about Digitopolis in the Phantom Toll Booth and Wayside Stories from Wayside School, all these other things where math was incorporated into the fictional journey of the characters. I read about dodecahedrons and how do you really know what infinity is and all these different things. And it just became this fascination. And at the same time, I was really intensely involved with Alfred Hitchcock's The Three Investigators, murder mysteries, Sherlock Holmes, and 2-minute mysteries, and the idea of deduction and solving things, given clues. And wow, did I come into my own when I found proofs in mathematics that I had to do, like, oh, this is deductive and inductive at the same time. I can totally do the proof and follow the logical outcome of this. And it just kind of fed my soul. So I think those elements in combination kind of were my math awakening. And then I never lost the love. And to be able to work with somebody and their eyes light up and I go, oh, so that's just like, yes, that's just like, and golly, there's nothing like it as a teacher. It creates your teacher mojo. You find oxygen again.
You know what, Rick, I got to say, like, that's such an awesome memory. And it's like, John and I were both, when you said it's on YouTube, like we immediately we're in a shared Google Doc right now. And both of us pasted the link at the same time, same exact link. We're like, oh, it's there. It's going to be in the show notes for everyone. But here's something that really, it hit me. So first of all, I mean, there was a couple feelings that I got, a couple emotions came over me when you shared that. First of all, I was like, how awesome that you have these memories, and it led to, it seems like probably helped to carve a bit of that path towards education for you. So how awesome is that? But then on the other hand, I don't want to, negate that positivity when I flip to this side, because, the part that I wonder about is like, do you ever remember any experiences in the classroom that did anything remotely close to what those episodes, those shows, those, experiences did? And it's great that they existed. But then on the other hand, I kind of look at that and go, do we still have to rely on a TV show to kind of bring out that excitement in math class? Like thinking of all the amazing things, all the amazing thoughts that you had through those experiences. And yet I feel like, we work with districts all over North America and beyond, and we see a lot of the same things happening that are probably fairly similar to what was going on in your classrooms when you were a student. And it's like, if students don't have this kind of, opportunity like you had, this sort of random opportunity on a hot summer day to go in there and have this routine that someone thought this would be a great show to show you, it's like, how come we don't have more kids going like, I remember being in 5th grade when blank, like this opportunity, this epiphany happened for them. And we do get it sometimes on the show, But most often we get negative experiences from the classroom, or the positive ones that come out are oftentimes not in the classroom. And that just kind of makes me sort of reflect on that. And I wonder for you, did that have any sort of influence on you as an educator when you got into the classroom? And I'm going to put myself out there, as I have on the show before. When I came in, I did it the exact same way I was taught. I was one of the lucky ones.
Yeah.
You know, I was a lucky kid. I picked up on it, quote unquote. I followed the patterns and I mimicked, and that got me through. And then that's what I replicated for a lot of kids for a long period of time. Did you find yourself like me coming in and kind of doing it the way everyone else did it, and then maybe transitioning? Or did you come in and like maybe right away you were inspired to do something different? Like, what did that look and sound like for you when you entered into the teaching profession?
Well, I might have been really fortunate. I got my training at Virginia Tech here in Virginia, in the Virginia area. We had some really good professors there, but one of the things that struck me, and actually, for lack of better language, I guess you just apologize for the vernacular, but frankly pissed me off, was I had a bunch of people teaching me about how to teach math that didn't know their math. And I, I'm this 19-year-old sophomore, or, going into these things. And I'm saying, no, that's a geometric progression. That is not a linear progression. And I was right. And I was able to prove it mathematically. And I'm saying, oh my God, you need to know your stuff before you're teaching math. And you're teaching teachers how to teach math. Why would you, do that sort of thing? Oh, this is why anything to the 0th power is equal to 1. This is vertex format versus standard. You've got those two reverse. I was able to engage with that. And I do remember very much in my schooling having teachers who allowed me to debate topics using math in support of my argument, rather than math for its own sake.
Right.
And that was wonderful.
Yeah.
It struck me that I'm very constructivist. So I need you to construct the meaning and figure out what's important in the equation, what's not important, what's extraneous as you do this. So I love the work of Joe Bowler, Sunil, Dan Myers, DeMoss, and all of them, where they do create this idea of it's totally not a foreign language. It is absolutely a part of our DNA and doable. But as James Nottingham out of the UK would say, I need to provide a learning pit, which is his phrase.
Right.
And you can type that in, and there's all kinds of stuff online about it, where you do really, given all these different tools and elements, you put together the meaning, and I facilitate and coach that, because my whole goal is getting you there, not me bestowing from on high, and you're sitting there passively. You're no longer actively engaged. And then you see it more and more as one more hoop through which I have to jump, not a meaningful pursuit or something that lights me up as a human in our society today. So I think the moments in my classes as a child where I was able to do constructivism and construct my own meaning carried forward, and my anger or disappointment in my college professors and how they were preparing us to teach math made me even more urgent and more passionate about not making those mistakes when I first started teaching. So yes, I would assign 35 math problems, and I'd say you have to do 35 odds, and because they weren't in the list in the back of the book.
Right.
And then
ACE.
3 out of the 5 enrichment ones. And I realized within 2 or 3 years, that was an endurance test. They really weren't looking at math. So I started assigning all the problems that where the answers were in the back of the book. And I said, compare your answer with the one in the back of the book. If I introduce this variable, how would your answer change, and why would it change, or why would it not change as a result of me changing this one element? And think, critically about that. And then I started doing things where instead of 35 math problems, or the subset of that, if you're only doing odds, I would do 7 math problems. But then what I would do is I'd put a dot or cartoon eyeballs near geographically where there was an issue. And you had to figure out where the mistake was. If I circled your mistakes, if I put vertical lines through your horizontal ones because it should have been a +4, not a -4. If I rewrote something because you didn't use the simplest form or expression of it, then I was learning a lot, but the kids are learning nothing. So I realized that a math class, whoever's doing the editing of work is doing the majority of learning. So I switched it from me doing the editing of work or response to it to the students doing it, but I had to shorten the assignments because Pascal was the one who actually taught me this. I'm that old. Look at the color of my hair, my white. But Pascal said, if I had more time, I would have written less.
Right.
And I realized that less is more in a math class. If I assign fewer practice problems, but you have to analyze where the errors are and correct them yourself, you will own them and you will not make those errors down the road. But if I do it, it's passive, and you continue to not be vigilant and attentive to those things that you learned. You want to internalize it because I'm the one that fixed it, not you. And I think that kind of really opened things up to much more effective instruction in the early to mid 80s when I started making those revisions to the way I taught.
Yeah. No, that makes so much sense. And I want to kind of bring that when you talk about like, effective instruction, and then tie it back to what you had said about that experience you had when you were getting taught math and you realized that they didn't know the math. So there's, Kyle and I talk with a lot of district leaders, with the district partners that we have throughout the year. And, a lot of times those leaders will ask about the professional development that they want to implement with their teachers. And they know that the content knowledge for, say, middle school or even elementary school teachers, and even we argue that high school teachers sometimes need more of a conceptual understanding of mathematics, like different models, different strategies to go about topics. So I guess my question, or I want to hear your thoughts on this, is it, do you think it's like more important, or where would you place the priority on, does a teacher need to be, an expert on mathematics for their topic? And like, do you do that first and then we worry about effective teaching practices? Or is it better for a teacher to have effective teaching practices and then teach them the mathematics? Like, which one do you think is like the priority to have to begin? Or like, where, do you know what I mean? Like, where do we start if we were gonna craft our own PD program?
I think you start with the chicken and not the egg. But anyway.
Yeah. I wrote that in my notes for this question, by the way.
Okay, yeah, fine.
We like to throw really tough ones at you. There you go.
Oh no, that was just a little yoke.
Yeah.
If you laugh, you're just encouraging him.
I'm using it with my kids later. Don't worry.
No, good. Yeah. Well, I'm a new grandfather, so the grandfather jokes supersede old dad jokes.
I bet.
At any rate, one of the things I'm cautioning every teacher against, I had to caution myself against, is this overfamiliarity. It's so familiar and clear in my head. Why isn't it clear in your head? And I don't develop an empathy for first-time eyes. And what we found in looking at research on empathy in math classes, teachers who score really high at empathy scales, those students tend to do better, because I can see where the misconceptions are bubbling up inside you. And I can remind myself, oh, I am so overly familiar. I'm falsely assuming it's clear in their heads, and I'm not double checking. And I need to turn that around and get there. In answer to your question, then, you cannot effectively look at the array or repertoire of instructional strategies in mathematics without being intimate with the mathematics concepts themselves. And the more intimate you are, the more dexterous you are. You think with an agility right there in the moment, let alone in the pre-planning quiet, whenever that time is for a teacher, but the quiet moments when you get to plan late at night for tomorrow's lesson and you're barely a page ahead of the kids as you're learning something new, if it's a new field you're teaching. But I can't, they have to happen simultaneously. So in other words, I can't do instructional strategies devoid of the math, and vice versa. I can't do the math devoid of the strategies. Problem, ask teachers, as I have done, and say, look, what are 12 different ways to teach this? The FOIL method or something, or matrices or whatever it might be, or simply adding fractions, different denominators or units of measure. What are 12 different ways to teach that? And they'll say, well, there's like 2 or 3. And I say, well, what are 15 different ways to assess that, where you're just looking at evidence of it, not compliance that they took a test or did a certain format, but that they really understand the concepts, and they're hard pressed. And they tend to say there aren't those ways. And then I realize those are people who are going to get very defensive, very threatened when I ask them to teach challenging things to diverse students. And the diverse students have rights, let alone just the ethic of our enterprise, our profession. That we have integrity, that I teach everyone, not just the easy ones, or the ones who know how to play the game of school. So it's beholden to me to have a wide repertoire where I get a challenging math concept to teach, and I get challenging students. I'm like, no problem. Bring it on. I'm fine. I can do this. And it feeds the intellect. I find, however, if you teach the same math course 3 or 4 years or more, there is a tendency for creativity and intellect to atrophy unless you go out of your way to cultivate your creative or your intellectual mind. I've written articles on this, and I do, presentations on it and so on. And I think that's missing in a lot of folks. They're overly familiar. They're no longer empathetic because they're so familiar they can't see it from, the other angles.
Absolutely.
And then they lack the creativity to think divergently, which is really what good mathematicians do. It is one of the ultimate things you do. And I like, for example, I think you can be deductive, inductive at the exact same time. Whereas some people say, no, it's an orderly schematic. And if you're not comfortable with ambiguity, you're probably going to fry a lot of brain cells teaching math today, because it'll be 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Here's another example. When I work in high schools, I want to pour cold water over some of my colleagues' heads, or the people with whom I'm tutoring, like, wake up, come out of your coma, because they will say things like this to me. How can I possibly teach, trig, or just teach algebraic expressions, polynomials, whatever it is? They don't even know their math facts. And I pull out the first grade 1, grade 2, for those of you in Canada, for their curriculum, and let's say, look, algebraic concepts. So isolating for the variable, multiplicative inverse, distributive property ideas, some of the basic things that go there. Look, they don't know the multiplication facts, but they're able to understand advanced concepts.
I love it.
Why are you limiting it to a linear mono progression or mono sequence when it is, every lesson is a 3-dimensional design? It is not 2-dimensional. And suddenly these doors start opening and we're okay. And we can revisit why we entered into math instruction in the first place. But in my class, do I ever have my kids memorize and just do basic rote stuff? Yes. So they can do the application. Like in my class, you have to memorize all your facts through the 20s. So when I taught elementary, middle, and high school, it wasn't just memorize through your 10s. You had to memorize through your 20s, because there's so many problems where 17 squared is asked, or 16 times 15. And so I want that immediately there. I wrote a whole article on why it's important to memorize stuff, even in a world in which you can still look it up and use the TI 84, 96, 100,000, whatever version will be out, next year.
Yeah.
And I know TI is faded, but anyway, but the idea that I can't work with stuff unless I have it in my mind with which to work. Yeah. So I think they're synergistic. I'm not trying to wiggle out of the answer.
No,
I completely agree.
I want to let you go where you wanted to go. But when John asked the original question about which one comes first, I had a funny feeling you were going to say it's like in a parallel. I mean, in a perfect world, you at least know the content entering into this profession, right? Like that would be.
But you can't think.
But most
you have it.
Exactly. Most school districts right now are assuming teachers have that content knowledge. They and not evolving, not adding to their repertoire of content knowledge at a conceptual level, and they're focusing all their attention on teaching practice and effective teaching strategies, but not making sure, hey, wait a minute, are my teachers well positioned enough to actually engage in those teaching strategies? Like I think they still have to be parallel today, even though it's like, oh, I have a degree in mathematics, so that means I don't have to worry about how to teach math, like or what to teach anymore. That's what's going on for a lot of districts, I think, right now.
To dimensionalize that too, there are a lot of teachers, and they tend to be more secondary level, but maybe there's certainly a significant amount of elementary, primary, where I say, can you tell me something about the modern understanding of the mind and how it learns, cognitive science, something that from that you can apply in the mathematics class, and show me that in your lesson design. And to me, your greatest single tool is your expertise in the human mind and how it learns. And they're very hard pressed. They're like, can I get back to you next Friday after I talk to mentors or my union representative? Because they're feeling threatened.
That Rick guy is not coming back to this place, right. Guy involved, right?
So, and so I'm like, no. This should be something that just trickles out of your mouth instantly. Here's what we know about the mind in general for high school students. Here's what we know about for middle or whatever it might be. So here's what I choose to do to be developmentally responsive. And that eludes a lot of people because they don't have training or they don't keep up with it. Because one of the jokes in education is, if you write a book on how the mind learns, within 1 year, it's already obsolete before it even hits the shelf practically, because we're constantly learning new things.
Yeah.
And so how do I in teachers of mathematics, how do I get you to see the value and the meaningfulness, and teaching smarter, not harder. So it's actually going to ultimately help you and de-stress you to keep up and how the mind learns.
Right.
Remember when retrieval practice became so big and everybody's talking about it, making it stick, Brown, Redinger, and McDaniel, and other ones, everybody got excited about, oh, how are we now going to change to an interleaved versus a block practice in mathematics and things like that. Well, I would expect teachers to keep up to speed on that. But if you're relying on what you learned 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or you've never had that background, now your window and the possibilities for how to be effective are so narrow, it's really stressing you out, demoralizing, and of course, it's not serving students.
Holy smokes, Rick, like you're blowing my mind here, and it all makes perfect sense though. Like I feel like when I came out of my teaching pre-service, here in Ontario, it was a 1-year program. You do your degree and then you do 1 year. Now it's a 2-year program. Sad reality is even though now it's a 2-year program, the word on the street is that, the amount of it hasn't doubled the amount of content knowledge, understanding of how the human brain works and how people learn. Like that's at least the anecdotal that we're hearing. But right idea. We want to give more. But I remember coming out and not knowing anything about, like, I'm sure I was in courses that taught me about learning, right? But I had my little math degree, and
or maybe
I went into
the
my
history of learning, the foundations like Dewey and the progressivism, and things like that. Bruner, Bandura, Piaget. You probably heard those fundamentals, but really, what do we know today? Keep going.
And how to apply them. Like how does this act? Like for me, it was definitely we had a psychology of learning class, and I don't feel like none of that resonated. Maybe I wasn't ready for it at the time, whatever that might be. But to your point, unless you are going above and beyond, we'll say, which what I heard you just say is that it shouldn't be above and beyond. It's like, we got to do this work in order to know how the human brain works and learns. And, John and I have done a lot of this work as well, which is what got us to do this podcast and do all of this work in mathematics, was trying to get to the answer of, how do we help students better understand math? Like, there's going to be call it the 30% that are going to come to you, and they're going to, like, whether you're there or not, whether you say this or not, they're going to be fine. They're going to figure it out and move along. But what about the other students? If it's 70%, if that's the number, I'm kind of using more of a science of reading statistic there. But ultimately, at the end of the day, like, there is a lot of heavy lifting to be done. And the sad reality is, I think that a lot of us are in a position in education where, there isn't enough time in the day in order for someone to get those pieces, unless they're willing to figure it out at other points in the day. And I, what I'm hearing you say, it's almost like a call to action. Like, what are we going to do? I would argue the people listening to this podcast, we don't even have to share that message, because they're listening to a podcast on their walk while they're doing the dishes, they're already digging in. But imagine, like, how do we help more colleagues come into this world? Because I'll be honest and say, Rick, I didn't realize we were going to go where we went today, because I was thinking, like, Rick's going to help us out with assessment and evaluation.
Oh, I'd love to do that.
we will. But what I'm wondering from you is, like, what would you say to those who are listening in order to, like, there's a lot of leaders that listen to this podcast, be it math coaches, be it principals, be it coordinators or directors. What would be, like, your thought, and how do you rally a group of educators who all mean well? And this is the one thing that's, I think, makes it really hard, is that everybody's doing the best that they can at the time. So, like, how do we nudge them to kind of take that step towards, say, understanding how we learn, or better understanding the content or the pedagogy?
Well,
what would you say?
I do think that we can always extend the benefit of the doubt, and that they are doing the best they can given their perspective and tools. And that, again, those of us who are leadership, if we're teachers, we've had such an experience. We can see all these possibilities they can't see, because we can assimilate lots of things and see patterns that otherwise are unrecognizable. They don't perceive the pattern. I can walk into a classroom and tell what kind of teacher a teacher is within 10 minutes. I can really assert things. But teachers who are not into that, critical analysis of practice, things like that, they're like all over the place. How did you know the teacher was like that? Or the teacher had that policy or that policy? That comes from experience. So we have to understand that, and that's great. But that does mean you stick with it instead of teaching for 4 years and then you get out. There's more to it than that. But there's also this idea of, let's sit down and be experiential. So I am now going to teach you a fairly esoteric math idea that's associated with gravitational waves that we've recently discovered. And we're going to go through all this stuff. And I teach it like I'm teaching a memoir. I mean, there are a lot of teachers who do lessons that are just a memoir. Here's how I learned it, and here's how I do it. So now, of course, because I told you that, you can do it. They're not realizing their success comes in the student understanding it, not in them proving that they understand it in front of children. And there are a lot of teachers who are convincing the class, look, I know what I'm doing.
That's a good one.
And it becomes really clear that the student success is a very fragile focus, intermittent at best. And so I will say, how do you know you're successful? And if I hear them saying, well, I was able to kind of get through this and do all this stuff, like, oh no, have you completely missed it? So how do we help students self-monitor rather than not? But when teachers experience that in a lesson, they begin to go, oh, now I'm seeing it. Because when you analyze somebody else's stuff, you are totally thinking about yourself. And then it moves into your internal editor, and you reference that when you're doing your own stuff. So I'll show videos of lessons that are not very successful or engaging and ones that are, and say, what was the difference? How do you do that? What was the relationship between the teacher and the students as a collaborator? I do it with students. I don't do it to students, this math instruction. It is only with their collaboration that we can be successful in mathematics. And so there's that mutual ethos. I'm looking out for you as much as you're looking out for me as we're doing this together, which means if I make a mistake, I invite you to find that, and I don't deflect on it. I don't pass it off. I go, oh, thank you. Exactly. Wow. I'm so glad you're on my team here, helping me forward. So I can model how not to know and still handle it with respect and grace instead of, oh no, it wasn't one and done. I got it or I didn't, and there's no in between, which is going to kill math for so many people. We don't want to do that. So I'm going to ask teachers to really think about the extent to which your whole focus in a lesson is about getting these different kids in whatever format they understand to be successful, not to get through that curriculum. And a reminder that it's what the kids carry forward after you've taught, not what you got through. So if your whole lesson, your whole focus is getting through material today, because if you don't, tomorrow's going to be a mess and you're going to have to rebuild and restructure, then I've said you've missed the entire point of teaching. And so now a mindset as I design any activity in any part of the lesson is, well, how is this going to lead to long-term retention and versatility down the road? So today might be building capacity for the really important thing that we're going to do in 4 days, rather than, oh, it's got to be today or nothing, and then we move on and we go lockstep through it. I'm hoping that experience of teachers receiving that, and maybe even analyzing scenarios, hypotheticals, what would a aligned with modern pedagogy teacher do here, who's sincerely interested in students being successful and appreciating and finding meaning in math, resonance in math, what would they do differently here than some other teachers? And when you sit in small groups and do that, when it's emotionally neutral, it's not urgent, like I have to figure it out like right now, you think with such expanded clarity from which you can draw when it really happens in your class.
That's that mindset, I think, is so important. I think it's overlooked on most teachers, and I'm so glad that you share that here on the podcast. And I think that, like, just thinking about that, how you're going into your lessons, and that, I think that does pair nicely with some of the things I think you're going to chat with us or share with us or teach us in the summit that's coming up in November, in the 2023 Make Math Moments That Matter Summit. We're coming up November 17th, 18th, 19th. Rick is doing a session with us. And Rick's going to talk about assessment, some feedback, and students
monitoring their own growth.
So that's like that part of it. So Rick, give us a snapshot of what you're going to teach, and then what, say, a teacher is going to walk out from that session.
Well, imagine if I stopped in your math classroom for like 10 minutes and I'm nodding, I'm walking around, I'm observing you, And as I'm leaving, there's a little quiet moment. So I come over to you and I'm leaving to go on to some other duty. And I say, oh, thank you for letting me observe your class. I wonder if this afternoon I come back and give you some feedback. Would that be okay? What do you think most teachers feel? In that moment, what did I do wrong? You know, kids tell me now, my imagination's going to run away with me. By this afternoon, I'm going to be a nervous mess. And that's because we see feedback and critical analysis of one's work as something where I have to self-preserve. I have to protect my ego. Something is, I have to endure it rather than welcome it. And what we want to do is we want to shift that to basically Little Shop of Horrors. Feed me, Seymour, feed me. And the idea is that I need that feedback, and it's a positive, not a threat to me. In fact, how do I grow unless I have critical analysis and I own my learning? And so in a math class, I want the heavy lifting to be done by the students, not me. So I might do a math quiz, a math test, a math project, and then I would give the students an empty item analysis chart. You know, this item was looking at this item was looking at this, and I asked prompt questions at the top of the column. Hey, where were you with this? Understand rational, irrational numbers, and whatever it happens to be that we're happy to be testing. Was it careless? Was it clueless? You know, sometimes they don't know the difference between those two. And I have to point out to them, how do you monitor whether you get it? When a math teacher goes, all right, before we take the test, any questions? That is a total waste of planet Earth's oxygen.
Totally.
The kids are not going to say anything.
Or you're only going to get that one student who's asking you the super hard problem that nobody else in the class even got to, you know?
How do I know when I do know? How do I know when I don't know? And then from that analysis, you create an action plan of learning, and I help facilitate and support that. But you own the learning. And this moves the student from agency to absolute solid efficacy, self-efficacy. They're empowered to do this stuff, and I own the math rather than make excuses for when I don't do well in the math. And it really helps the perfectionist. If I don't get like all these perfect, you know, I'm a mess. I'm nothing. I don't know. No, that's not at all the humanity of math and the love and the joy that we can find in math. And I hate that math is treating you like that in your mind's eye. Yeah. So we will give lots of techniques on how to help students self-monitor, descriptive feedback that's actionable, and to make feedback something that is sought. And some of the guiding principles, like, you know, really calling from Jim Knight's instructional coaching, the idea of, I am not going to declare or assign an attribute or a trait to what you did. I'm going to ask questions to get you to arrive at that discovery. And how do I become that coach rather than that didactic? Here's where I went wrong. Here's what you need to fix. Now shape up and learn it, memorize it for the next unit. Which is not going to be creating any kind of love or resonance with mathematics.
As soon as you started sharing that and you kind of painted that picture in the classroom and, you know, saying, well, I'll come back and I offer you feedback, like immediately who popped into my mind, I'm sure, John, you probably know as well. We had Jim Strachan come on the show, and he's done some work around mentorship and mentoring for all. And, you know, his move is very similar to that, you know, where it's like, it's all about you and what is your perception of, or, you know, or of what happened. Right. Because I mean, ultimately I could give you mine, but
no, because I could impose my narrative and perception on you. Right. But that's not going to help you learn.
Totally. It's like, it might offend you. It might, you know, make you feel bad. It might hurt your ego, as you said. So I see some similarities there, which I think is fantastic. And I am so excited. I can't imagine, John, people who are listening to this episode right now going, you know, I'm registered for the summit, but I don't know if going to see Rick's going to be a good idea for me. I've got a funny feeling.
It's not going to be, it's not going to be very engaging, or
I'm a little worried about.
He speaks in so monotones.
I'm a little worried about the summit site. As soon as the episode goes live,
I have the perfect tool.
I'll go there and register for that session.
See, I'm a talking head.
Yeah.
And for those of you who can't see on video, I'm holding up a mannequin.
Hey, that's a reason for people to go to YouTube, because, you know, not only do we talk about Donald Duck and, you know, and the math, you know, the mathemagical, you know, whatever,
math magic
we'll
land,
have that in there, but you'll also get to see not only Rick as the talking head, but Rick's mannequin or whatever that was that we just saw. But
Halloween's coming up. I'm getting everything ready for the front yard.
It's like a wig.
I love it.
It's like a wig thing. Yeah.
Rick, we could chat with you all day. We said we're going to try to keep it to 30 minutes. There you go. We blew it again, as usual, because it's always so great to go down the educational rabbit hole with awesome people like yourself. We so appreciate all of your ideas that you bring to education, in particular around assessment and evaluation. But something interesting about assessment and evaluation that I've learned over the years is that ultimately all the other stuff is all connected, you know, and you've kind of modeled that for me today, right? So you've really helped people to see that when you go into that session with Rick at the summit, you're not just going to learn about a strategy for assessing or evaluating, or, you know, how do you report or anything like that. You're going to learn about good teaching practice, and you're going to learn about ensuring that we're doing everything we can to help every student go to the next place in their learning journey. So a lot of big takeaways here today. But Rick, if we had to ask you for one thing that you're hoping that the Math Moment Makers take away here from today's episode, what would you leave them with if they could only take one?
Oh, that's just,
I know.
That's just not nice.
No, like
more
of a think of it like a big idea instead of like
takeaway,
one of the ideas
maybe
you
a
talked
next
about.
step for them to think after this episode.
You know, to cultivate a large repertoire of response and not settle for, well, I'm not creative enough to follow through and do that, so I'm going to give up on the principle. The math instructional principles, the assessment grading principles, evaluation principles are worthy. And if you can't fathom the mechanics or logistics of it, that doesn't mean you give up on the principle. The idea is that you surround yourself with people who are provocateurs, who will make it compelling to do a deeper dive and explore it. And it does mean that we cultivate our own creative selves. And I don't leave that to chance or for my school district to do it. If I'm waiting for the school district or school division to do that, I'm not even treading water. I'm in charge of my own professional development. And so I have to constantly feed that. Otherwise, I'm going to become jaded and a little bit cynical about math instruction or about students today. And really, that's more in my court. So I'd hope that they would embrace that and be open to those ideas. And then kind of part two of that is, am I so jaded or in my own head that I cannot see the way other people struggle with something or are making connections and not appreciate that? For example, in Second City and improv, the golden rule is to take whatever they say and run with it rather than immediately dismiss it, which invokes ego and survival, and I just shut down. So the idea of how do I take students' ideas and run with it and make sure students clearly have a seat at the math instruction table rather than it's done to them. No, it's done with them. And their lives, their earned insights in mathematics have absolute significant play in today's instruction or this week's instruction rather than something just to be dismissed because it was all wrong and I'm going to tell you the right way to go. So those two concepts working together, I think, would be a lasting gift to think about, for the next year or two.
Amazing. Rick, thanks so much for joining us here on the podcast. Where can folks go if they want to reach out to you? They want to ask you questions. What's the best place that they could go to?
Well, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. No.
Yeah. Leave a note.
Yeah, right. You can always go to rickwormeli.com, www. There's a way to email me there. But can I say the email address too?
Totally up to you if you'd like.
Yeah, it's up to you.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, first on Twitter or X or whatever it's called a month from now.
Yep.
It would be at Rick Wormeli 2. There's at Rick Wormeli, but it was hacked. It's my old account, but I haven't used it in like 6 years. So anyway, at Rick Wormeli 2. And then my email is just rick at, and then the domain name, I'm on Microsoft doing this. It's called at rickwormeli.onmicrosoft.com. And hopefully maybe you can post that on a website, but rickwormeli.onmicrosoft.com.
Perfect. Yeah. We got all that. And we will we'll include all of those on our show notes page. And again, thanks so much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing your session at the summit come this November.
Hey, thanks, John. And thanks, Kyle. It's been a real honor. And thank you for what you're doing for leadership in this, let alone the instructional practice and the benefit to students.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rick. And we hope you have an awesome rest of your day over at 1600 Pennsylvania. No,
exactly. Yeah.
Take care, Rick. We'll chat soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.